Welcome to the fourth in our series of videos about how to set up your XMC-1. In this video, we're going to cover a few advanced topics. We'll show you how to set up the triggers on your XMC-1 to turn on your amps for you. We'll show you how to set a station on the XMC-1's AM/FM tuner, and we'll show you how to enable the video on standby option. Let's start with the triggers. The XMC-1 has 4 trigger outputs, each of which can be independently configured to switch on when different conditions are met. For example, you could configure trigger 1 to turn on the power amp that runs your front speakers whenever the XMC-1 is on, while setting trigger 2 to turn on the amp that runs your surround speakers, but only when you are in a surround sound mode. Or you could set trigger 3 to turn on your CD player when the input it is connected to is selected. To get the trigger configuration screens, you'll need to go into the Setup menu, select Triggers, and pick the trigger you wish to configure. For this example, we'll start with trigger 1. At this point, you will see a group of checkboxes that you can configure. You configure your XMC-1 so each trigger is on when a set of specific conditions are met. In general, when a box is checked, then the item next to it becomes one of the conditions necessary for that trigger to be active. It turns out that rather than thinking about which boxes to check, it is easier to think about unchecking the boxes for things you don't want to turn on the trigger. This is why, out of the box, the XMC-1 is configured with most of the trigger conditions already enabled. First, each trigger must be configured to be active when the main zone, zone 2, or both zones are on. That setting is under Power. The trigger will only be active when one or more of the zones it is associated with are therefore active. Since we really only want trigger 1 to work for the main zone, confirm that the checkbox under Power for main zone is checked, and the one next to Power for zone 2 is therefore unchecked. Next, each trigger must be configured to be associated with one or more inputs. That setting is under Inputs. The trigger will only be active when one or more of the inputs it is associated with are therefore active. Since we're configuring trigger 1 to turn on our main amps whenever we're using our XMC-1, we want it to go on when any of the inputs are also in use. So just confirm that all the checkboxes under Input are therefore checked. Finally, each trigger must also be associated with one or more speaker groups. That setting is under Speakers. The trigger will be active whenever the main zone is on and one or more of the inputs associated with that trigger is active and one or more of the speaker groups associated with that trigger is active. Since we want trigger 1 to be on when the main zone is on and any input is on, and we're using our front speakers, confirm that under Speakers the checkbox next to Fronts is checked. CEC is a standard that allows video devices to talk to and control other devices. Most TV sets, pre-pro processors, and Blu-ray players support some form of CEC. Ideally, CEC can be used to allow a Blu-ray player to automatically tell the XMC-1 to turn on when you insert a disc, or to allow your TV to control the volume on the XMC-1. Unfortunately, since everyone interprets the standard differently, how well it works for you will depend on the other equipment in your system that you have. The XMC-1 allows you to accept or ignore several different CEC commands, so you can use the commands that work well with your other equipment and disable the ones that do not. You can access the XMC-1's CEC configuration from the Setup CEC menu. If you notice your XMC-1 acting oddly when certain other equipment is connected, try disabling some of the CEC options. If this doesn't help, you may also have to disable CEC on your other equipment. Let's move on to the tuner. The XMC-1 includes a highly sensitive, high-performance analog AM/FM tuner. You can run the tuner through the menu from either the front panel controls or the remote. There are also a set of convenient shortcuts you can use from the remote control or the menu. On the remote control, once you select the tuner as your active input, you can use the direct control buttons, which are near the bottom of the remote, to tune or seek between stations. If you're operating your XMC-1 from the front panel, There are a set of simple shortcuts you can use to control the tuner. These only work after you select the tuner as your active input, and all of them require you to hold down the tuner button on the front panel while operating another control. To tune to a different frequency, turn the volume knob while holding down the tuner button. This works just like spinning the tuning knob on an old-fashioned tuner. To seek to the last or next station, use the left and right navigation buttons instead. To switch between AM and FM bands, press the Enter button while holding down the tuner button. You can also manually enter station frequencies from the tuner menu, which you can access from either the front panel or the remote control. This is also where you create new station presets and rename or delete existing ones. Once you enter the tuner menu, the first things you'll see are the band and frequency options. These work just like you would expect. Set the band for AM or FM and enter the frequency of the station you want in the frequency field by using the up or down arrows. If you want to select a station that you've already saved and name, you can do that from the station screen. If you did not assign a name to your preset, then the name will simply be the frequency. The Saved Station menu is where you control your station presets, and it acts differently depending on whether the station you have tuned in is already on your saved station list. If the station you have tuned in isn't already in your list, when you select the Saved Station option, you will be prompted to save the current station and you'll have a chance to enter a name for it. If the station you have tuned in is on your list already, you'll have the option of renaming it or forgetting it. Forgetting a station drops it from your preset stations list. By default, the standby mode on your XMC-1 is set to lowest power. In this mode, the XMC-1 uses the least possible power when it is in its standby mode. However, the XMC-1 has another option. To enable it, go into the Setup Advanced menu and set Standby to Video Remains On. We call this mode Video on Standby, and it does draw a bit more power than the other option, but it offers several benefits in return. In this mode, the XMC-1 continues to pass video and audio to your monitor when it is in standby mode. In fact, you can even select different inputs when the XMC-1 is in standby. This is handy if you sometimes want to watch content on your TV without firing up your entire system. When you have video on standby mode enabled, part of your XMC-1 will continue to run whenever the rear panel switch is turned on, even when it is in standby. That is how it can still route video and change inputs. However, because of this, when video on standby mode is selected, your XMC-1 can switch from standby to on in a matter of seconds. This ends the fourth video in our series about how to set up and configure your XMC-1.